This is to remind you that I will attack
Wait
you.
for the green box. All right, we are live.
Hey, everybody.
All right, so welcome to 8 Ballin' podcast number 2.
It's so exciting. It's the first time.
Podcast number X. I think it's 7 overall. This is our first show with a guest. We have Noah on.
Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Noah and Charlie are going to be going at it, and I may just sit back and be entertained. So, Noah, why don't you introduce yourself? Let everybody know why you're here and what you want to talk about. And then, Charlie, you can just explain how you are potentially ideologically opposed to what Noah may have to say under share, and we'll go from there.
So, my name is Noah. I identify as a Libertarian Socialist, which I was mentioning in some of the pre-show banter that I used to identify as a communist, but I've since reevaluated my views as I've taken in more information, and I feel like Libertarian Socialism better represents my beliefs. I am here on the show, I believe, to play heel, and I am on the side of socialism and the nanny state and all that.
The nanny state. That's exactly how I would describe it.
I got to appreciate a little self-deprecation, but for my benefit, explain to me just a high-level overview of your version of socialism and how, and then specifically what libertarian socialism would be.
So,
or is.
My first belief that I uphold, which I already know is going to be objected to, is that government is an inevitability. I think as long as human society exists, we will form governments. So as long as governments are around, I think the best use we have for them, the best function that a government can provide is to improve the well-being of its citizens, to do the most good for the most citizens, and then secondarily for the world and as a world actor, and to do the least harm to its own citizens, and again, secondarily as a world actor. So I believe that...
Can I interrupt you? Are you talking, that sounds like it might also be referencing the role of the United States in the world.
Yeah. So obviously we have the biggest influence. Like we are, we're the greatest country on earth in terms of impact. Anything that we do is going to have major ramifications for the rest of the world. So if we make positive strides towards socialism, then I believe a lot of the world will follow suit. With the intended goal of helping the citizens to have the best quality of life that they can have, I think some of the most direct approaches to that end goal would be guaranteed healthcare, guaranteed education, and and down the list, different variety of programs that guarantee certain aspects of high quality of life.
So can I steal some thunder potentially from you at just to level set us?
It's been building up, but please go right ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to dive into a little specificity on that, would guaranteed health care necessarily be a single provider healthcare system?
I believe so. I think, when we look at the rest of the developed world, we lag behind them all in healthcare. We have 45,000 Americans each year die because they don't have access to efficient health or quality healthcare, and I think that is a crisis. So, with the incredible wealth that the United States has, it's criminal that the bottom line of American citizens don't feel that, at least in the guarantee of life. You know what I mean?
Okay, but so that's not necessarily a single payer system. No.
Well, so I mean,
And we can dive into that.
And we can also discuss quality versus less expensive / cheap. But yeah,
But I just want to get a fundamental understanding.
Right. And I think I know what you're saying. I just Chris is he hasn't talked to you as long as I have, but you have any more? If you had any more questions, you can.
Yeah. Then also guaranteed education is a a very, very broad statement.
Like,
And this is for the benefit of us, and also so whoever may watch, gets the most out of this. So
Sure.
what would that mean necessarily?
I believe that every American citizen should have access to free higher education, beyond high school. So I personally, I would be happy to see it go as far up as education goes. But, there's different proposals, there's different ideas that circulate, and I am not particularly attached to one platform over another. Like if there was a bill that was being voted on that would provide, first 2 years free, I wouldn't turn it down because it wasn't more. You know what I mean?
Yep.
okay, well, I can address those, but I think you first want me to explain who I am for the sake of this episode, or what?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would personally identify as an anarchical capitalist, which whatever, you can be shortened into ANCAP. But in the green room, before we started, I pointed out, hey, I would be more comfortable advocating for capitalism than I would be for any variation of it, including anarchical capitalism. But my philosophy begins with every human being owns themselves, right? You're self-owner of your own body and your choices, and interpersonal interactions are governed by the non-aggression principle, which is I do no harm to you or your property. I by force or by fraud. That's it. And that basically leads me to Chicagoan economics or Friedman economics, Adam Smith, those guys. And I think that is either the extent of how government should interact in our daily lives, or if I were arguing as an anarchist, that's too much interaction, and all that stuff can be taken care of by the free market without imposing rules and laws and taxation on people. Yeah.
So as coincidence would have it, I'm sitting smack dab physically in the middle of you two,
The moderate, the weakest of the three.
if you want to say that. And consequently, I would say just pretty much have beliefs that are smack dab in between the middle of you two. So,
Right. And I would agree with that, I think, how we've interacted and what you've said to me.
yeah. Yep, I believe in safety nets. I believe in some level of education, but I also believe that certain things need to be earned. I think capitalism is the most effective and most efficient economical system, but I also agree, being the wealthiest country in the world, that turning people away from health care in particular is a crime. But absolutely do not espouse equality of income, but totally espouse equality of opportunity. And there are problems surrounding all the things I just said.
And you mind if we start there? Equality of opportunity?
Sure.
That's a great place, because I think Noah and I last time we had actually, let's start there. How Noah and I know each other. Noah, as you can see, is closer in age to myself than Chris.
The guy with the gray beard.
But that's actually what's that called? Touch of gray. He does that to his beard. That's not natural.
Thank you for that.
So
now I gotta interrupt you. You met my buddy from Chicago, who came in for the event over the weekend?
Oh yeah.
Apparently, at least in Chicago, it's trending. Younger people are highlighting and/or dyeing their hair like gray and silver. So,
I have no comment.
have you guys observed this?
Yes, I have. And
Just on a little social aside here.
I haven't, but I was actually thinking about that on the way here, just coincidentally, because one thing led to another, and I was going down a rabbit hole of research on like which physical qualities are like survey the most popular, which hair color, which eye color, and I learned that
Get this guy in just a little tighter.
I learned that blonde hair, to my surprise, is the least popular hair color.
were you thinking about this because you're appearing on broadcast?
Well, sort of, but
Yeah,
you
sure.
know how these things go. You just you have a question and then you wind up somewhere else.
Through the internet,
Yeah.
interweb, right?
Okay, so sorry to have interrupted you. You were starting on
that's all right.
equality of opportunity.
Actually, I went there and then I tangent to how Noah and I know each other. We went to school together. We had a class together. It was I thought, decently interesting class. The other 17 students not necessarily would agree with me fully in that. I was maybe including Noah himself, but he can explain too. And my first impression of Noah was he's the only other person in this class who actually gives a shit and is capable of excelling beyond the minimum requirements, which led me to respect him. And we've had a few political/philosophical discussions since then, and I respect at least his resolve.
Yeah, and that's great. And Noah referenced a little bit of conversation we had before the podcast, and a huge problem. So you guys are like totally strange bedfellows, right?
Totally.
And a huge problem right now in America is opposing viewpoints will not sit down and have civil discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that you solve problems is to allow somebody to speak. Give them their 2 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, and then civilly respond.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
Noah had concern that he might be walking into a buzzsaw here, and that's not what we're trying to do. Quite the opposite.
Well, it's my first live appearance anywhere representing I guess my ideology. So, I'm happy to be I'm glad to be reassured that I'm here for positive discussion as opposed to like a gotcha kind of Fox News deal.
Yeah.
Oh, that's that's ridiculous. I think that's completely rude and impolite, and I wouldn't be party to it, and neither would Chris.
Yeah.
And why would I? I don't need to, because I actually think you're a nice guy, and I enjoy that you're also willing to at least take a bite when I start rambling on, which most people are like, you get the fuck away from me. Like,
Yeah.
And I imagine you've had similar experiences. People are just like, don't want to talk about it. They're like, whatever, dude.
Well, people with fringe ideologies at least have put a decent amount of thought into it. Usually.
I would agree. Which is how they end up with the fringe, right? Yeah. It looks like he's
I'm
rolling
not sure.
something around.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree. I think they're just so steeped in ideology, and in kind of mob mentality and mob thought, that they've not intellectualized what they stand for. And what you've done, which is a great thing, is you kind of embraced an ideology, thought about it, studied it, and actually come to something that works intellectually and socially and whatever the other driving forces behind your personality are. And you have your own, semi-hybrid and unique position.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the problem is I think people don't think. You take, and maybe you might identify yourself as this or not, but you take just kind of your standard, if you got like a YouTube snippet of your typical social justice warrior, they're just chanting the same ideology, and you couldn't pick out one individual from another. And the same potentially on, like, I guess the best reference I would have maybe it's become antiquated now would be like the Tea Party movement. and they just all espouse the same values, and they're an extreme of an ideal, and it's totally homogenous, and there's no room for any individuality, which is sad and is going to lend to, again, no reasonable discourse, and which won't lead to any kind of change or common ground.
At least good change. Yeah. Right.
Right.
I just noticed, I like that both of us have our ideologies can be characterized by a 2-word title. Libertarian Socialism and anarcho-capitalism. I think that's like stereotypical of young man
Well, so
thinking.
I agree with the criticisms of like the SJW crowd and like the far right crowd, but I think we need to be more critical of people who are just willing to consume the narrative of the Democrats and the Republicans, and without ever like the people who are happy to vote for a Democrat because they've got a D next to their name, as opposed to like what policy positions they may or may not have. And I think most of the unthinking masses tend to gravitate towards the center, which here in America is like the center right. But yeah, I think the majority of people who don't put much thought into it are moderates as opposed to extremists.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had lunch with a friend at work yesterday, and we were talking about. Now I lost my train of thought. Just who's involved in and who's kind of front running and the shifting that's going on with regard to all the Democrats that have tossed their hat in the ring, and he was talking about. I'm losing his point. But my point was, Donald Trump's going to rerun. Somebody's going to be the Democratic nominee. Staunch Democrats are going to vote for that person regardless, right? Whether it's, I think the 3 front runners, I think the most progressive would be Bernie Sanders. I think the next would be Elizabeth Warren, and maybe you could argue those two based on different points. And then, approaching more moderate would be Joe Biden. And I told him that staunch Democrats, which is, let's say, 30% of the population, 35, maybe even 40, they're voting for whoever that person is, because that's what they do, right? And if it's Trump or
Mitt Romney, same deal with Mitt Romney, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if it's Trump or whomever, it doesn't matter whether or not they agree with the individual. The Republicans are going to vote for the Republican. So it's that 10% in the middle or less, that are independents and or swing voters who may or may not identify with the party. They're going to side elections for me, the foreseeable future, because everybody's just too steeped in, a couple of really, really, really hard points that are kind of the identities of the two parties. Mm-hmm. And people just aren't going to think beyond that. In fact, Chris Matthews, I don't know if you guys saw this. I recorded it. It's worth watching. Held a, and I'm not the biggest fan of the guy. He's gotten too abrasive. But anyway, held kind of, I'd equate it to maybe like a town hall, and it wasn't a a left leaning crowd or agenda at all. And the people in there, it was very sad. They couldn't articulate any opinion. And it was very clear that their education was sound bites from Fox or sound bites from MSNBC or the personalities on there. Mm-hmm. And I only watched 10 minutes of it before I had to get away from the screen. And I'll go back and watch the whole thing another time when I'm not so irritable. But the left-leaning people, 2 of them just said, the problem's, it's big pharma. And people are addicted to opiates. And he was actually doing a very job at being objective and saying, well, so what about big pharma? Well, big pharma and doctors pushing opiates and all the money that's being made. But what about big pharma? And it was, well, big pharma and doctors, and they're all in bed. And then there was a guy. So, and two people said that, and it was almost that ignorant. And then he asked a guy who was clearly right-leaning, and he said, it's the border. The border's too porous. And we have criminals and rapists and drug dealers coming across the borders. And oh, my God.
Talking point. Right.
Well, yeah, and it was a line out of Trump's election. I'm like, dude, that's a 3-year-old mantra. So, but all of these people could not get beyond sound bites that they'd heard either from politicians or media. And they couldn't actually cite any specificity to any opinion. Big pharma, border's too porous. Big pharma. And it to me, just really, really pointed out a sad state of affairs where somebody couldn't get specific on something they actually felt that was unique to them as an individual.
Now, let me jump in here. I think my philosophy, I think that is inevitable, and that's you can't have it the other way, where 60% of Americans, 30% blue, 30% red, whatever you want to say, actually know what the fuck they're talking about and care enough about something other than their own daily life to be effective voters. In that book that I gave you, the Mike Malice book, he says, people who need leaders are unfit to elect them. Now, I don't think that I agree with that entirely, because I think a lot of people need leaders because they're more effective in other parts of society. And they're not necessarily morons or whatever, but I think a lot of people just don't either understand the gravity of what it is to be, what was the Greek, our presentation? A politicos, or have the mental capacity to understand it.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said except for the opening line out of the book. There are people who need leaders.
Right. That's why I gave the
because
caveat.
There can only be one chief, right? Go back to tribes. There's one chief. There's one leader. It's the world's a pyramid, right?
Hierarchies, are naturally occurring.
Yeah, humans organize themselves in hierarchies, and there's going to be or a handful of leaders.
Now, let's get to the juice of this podcast.
Wow, pointing fingers.
Sorry. He doesn't believe in hierarchies.
That's a macroaggression.
Yeah. I don't want to mischaracterize your opinions. The last time we talked, I think it came across to me that you were much more in favor of an egalitarian society.
Absolutely. I think hierarchies are an antiquated conservative viewpoint.
They're a viewpoint. They're not a thing.
Well,
it's a fairy tale.
No, I mean they can be actualized just like just like many other concepts can. But I think they are ultimately not necessary for human functionality. And I think it gets to the point where the status quo hierarchy is, of a given society becomes inefficient. And at that point, it's no longer serving its purpose. So you need to move away from it. So like this is one of the things that I really like about Karl Marx and his worldview. I'm not strictly a Marxist, but I
wouldn't have pegged you as that.
But I have Marxist leanings, and I think one of the things that he really hit the nail on the head on was with the dialectic, the conflict theory of human history, which is to say that in every society there is the overclass and the underclass. And, the overclass has more rights than the underclass, and the underclass is subservient to the overclass. And eventually the tensions between those two classes get so great that there's,
bloody revolution.
We'll call it a sweeping societal change.
Bloody revolution, please. Let's make a correction for the audience.
Yeah. So you can trace it back to the earliest human societies. As soon as we were forming like city-states, we had the leadership and we had everyone else.
There's been hierarchies since before leadership.
Sure, yeah.
Or the city-states, forgive me.
Well,
The Acropolis.
But the beauty of it is that we move away from them as time goes on. You know, we don't have slaves anymore. You know, that one is that's a way out. And then we move into like you know, feudalism. We get like serfs and you know, peasants, and that has become outdated too. And then we move into like industrial capitalism or mercantilism before that, but then industrial capitalism, and then modern capitalism, and then you know, the writing is on the wall that there's a big left swing coming, and we're gonna likely move into the next form of the next phase of human progress, socialism.
Now, but I would just consider that the addition and subtraction of different or additional / unnecessary hierarchies. I wouldn't say that that's the argument kind of proves my point that they're naturally occurring. And it's just like I don't see why, if it's a naturally occurring thing, why you'd need a joint entity, which is what the government is. It's just a way people get together to solve problems together, to artificially construct or obstruct that hierarchy.
So you're making a fallacious argument right now. You're making an appeal to nature. And the response to that is that not everything that appears in nature is something that we ought to mimic in human society. And an easy example is rape.
That's fair. Okay, that's a fair point. I'll say that. How about I say I think that hierarchies are a good thing, and I think that having the government to artificially manipulate them, much like having the Fed artificially manipulate the economy, is against our best interests because people can do it on their own.
Well, so
I got to interrupt. Rape's a very bad example because it's not hierarchical in nature. It's tyrannical.
No. He's pointing out that it is an occurrence in nature that almost always is how reproduction happens.
Well,
yeah,
not even like
not not almost always.
Dolphins do it just recreationally,
and they kill each other for fun.
Yeah.
But like a cat, right? Cats and ducks, those are all great examples of how rape is the...
Yeah, if you're not a human, every act of sexual intercourse is technically rape.
Why didn't I say that? I think I said that to you on our phone call, didn't I? It's not a human. What was it? It's not a human. It's not a human. I remember saying that over and over again to you. But yeah, that's my point.
That said, it's natural. And this may sidetrack the entire potential conversation or be a rabbit hole that we don't want to go down. But, you know, for humans, the cliche is that the biggest sex organ is the brain, right? So we've complicated everything. We've complicated most of what we do. Humans, I think, from an evolutionary standpoint, in my just single opinion, we have evolved to a level of intelligence that we were never intended to get to. You know, we are one species that can almost inarguably destroy every other species on the earth. And that's a scary thing.
Just look at what we're doing right now. What other species on this planet would ever even come close to inventing, or just by accident, a single thing on this table or in this house, whatever?
Crows.
You know? Quails. Oh,
crows.
Oh, crows. I almost ran over a crow today because it wouldn't move. I was very disappointed with it, but I was patient in the Best Buy parking lot.
I'm not sure crows could get together.
They don't have the main thing, right?
And well, they don't, right. No opposable thumbs, so there's a problem because we set the camera up and got it to work. But now what was I going to... Oh,
shit,
I don't think they would be involved in a broadcast that literally... I mean, this has evolved in, you know, this technology that I put together basically in a weekend.
Unfathomable.
We are broadcasting live literally to the world.
Yeah. And the world is watching.
Hello, world.
Don't look at the view count.
And if it's not clear, Noah's sitting immediately to my left. We just didn't have a good way to get him.
And if you're looking at, he's right there.
Yeah. We didn't have a good way to get him either in one picture or We don't have the ability yet to switch between speakers.
Yeah, because here would have been, yeah,
Cramped.
yeah. Well, we totally went somewhere else. All right.
Well,
The nature
but I do
argument,
need to
yeah.
hear. I need to hear a little bit more about crows because I haven't heard this argument.
So crows are very articulate in their linguistic abilities. There's been studies done to see to what degree a crow can describe something to another crow, and the results are very impressive. I don't remember all the specifics of it, so I don't. You'll have to look into it if you want the good details. But the gist of it is that the tester puts on a human mask, with human features, and goes into the woods and is aggressive towards some crows, captures them, tags them, maybe roughs them up a little bit, and then lets them go. And then later on, another tester, somebody else wearing the same human mask, comes into the woods or whatever, and then other crows that haven't been tagged display aggressive tendencies towards this person. So the conclusion is drawn that the crows who were there and experienced the original test went on to just talk about it to the rest of the crows, and then the crows that weren't there firsthand, had such a vivid description of the qualities, the physical qualities of the tester, that they were able to seek them out and identify them.
But
So hang on. So not to be hard on you.
I was
so
gonna
was
say.
there like a double-blind study where there was also an experiment done where different people went out and this wasn't the case? So they had the ability to identify between different humans.
Because it's just like a human is a human is a human, regardless of the face. You don't need the facial description to explain what it is to another crow.
Right. That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Because maybe they just fear humans.
Yeah.
Well,
Or they learned, from that experience, they learned it.
Like I said, there's a good chance I am misrepresenting some of the details. We can. I can come on again on a later
That's
date. I can
okay.
make another appearance, and we can make a redaction about the crow story.
No, it doesn't matter. We're just doing what we
That's
do
okay.
best. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Busting,
well, and
ball watches.
I'm a detail guy, so
which is admirable.
I can't take anything at face value, and I won't.
Skeptical. Healthy.
I'm a skeptic. I am
Yeah.
a skeptic.
And you know how long it took me to get to in public education a point where a teacher was actually advocating for skepticism?
College?
11th, I'm sorry, not 11th grade. I was going to say 11th grade. No, third year of college. Some teacher finally said, healthy skepticism is good for you. And I was like, it took me that long to get somewhere for a teacher to be like, don't believe everything you hear because you're a moron and other people are morons. That's why I don't want the government running shit.
Yeah, well, academia, and I'm not a fan of governors, which is the right word for politicians. They're not politicians. They at least shouldn't be. They're governors. But anyway, I digress. Hopefully, our elected governors are more rational than the direction academia seems to have taken in the last decade or two. Hopefully.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that academia has gotten so liberal and so politically correct that dissenting opinions are generally not invited.
And what is the point of a university other than to allow for people to share and defeat ideas? Right?
Well, so specifically, what are some ways?
Well, just in a certain class, the opinion you espouse and we're here listening to today and encouraging you to express yourself might not be welcome. Charlie's opinion in certain classes, same thing.
It's frequently
Don't want to hear it,
not
you're not welcome.
Yeah.
It's not on the syllabus. Keep to yourself. Find another class or another school.
So I think a good teacher is going to be open to a good discussion.
Right, but teachers are a product of their environment, just like all people. Like, if you're around other people who espouse that nonsense, well, I shouldn't say that. You're going to react to it and shut your mouth or learn when to smile and nod, and not all classes. Obviously, there's like whatever history of art class you don't need to be talking about.
Yeah. But I
Trump.
mean, go ahead and
Mostly.
finish. But I think the longer we might talk about this, the more I think we'd actually realize that we agree with each other. But go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that if schools were better funded, we would have an average higher quality of teacher, and so it would be a more welcoming environment to more ideas.
Well, no. Okay. I have two comments on that. One is, while I don't necessarily disagree with that, teachers get into the line of work they get into. The amount of money teachers make is no secret, right? But once they're vested in their career, then all of a sudden they have a problem with what they signed up for. And that bothers me.
So what if the issue is then the training that they receive? They come in with the passion, and then they become jaded when they realize, oh, there's not a good network for me to learn to do this effectively.
Well, hang on. A minute ago you said they weren't paid enough and that was the problem. Now you're saying that they get disenchanted after they realize that the system doesn't allow for what
Due
they
to
want to
poor
do.
training, but
Well, wait. Let's pick one.
Well, so I guess I'll clarify that I meant the latter when it sounded like I said the former. What I meant was that education needs better funding. So while I do believe that teachers should be paid more, that isn't the argument that I was making. There should be more education or more funding for for looking into ways to improve our education, because there are, if you look at different models around the world, I did some of this research, just for my own amusement, and I was looking into like how Scandinavian countries teach their kids, how like Asian countries teach their kids, and there's a lot of different methods out there that that have been proven to be more successful or less successful, and I don't think we're investing enough into I guess the necessary research into what works and what positive changes we can make, and then acting on those changes.
So, go ahead.
I just want to tangent and pin. So, no, I'm forgetting the pin. Tangent is this. What I think of when I hear increased, public funding of schools and education is Detroit public school system. And what the hell just happened like recently over there? Huge corruption case. Like, how many millions of dollars got wasted on, what was it, like chairs or something? Or it was hundreds of millions of dollars that someone was like doing essentially like, yeah, fraud, just fraud. Hey, we don't need this stuff, but I'm buying it because this is somebody that I know, and this is a way to get the money to them, and we're just going to spend all this money on this. We need more money. Oh, yeah, how did you guys spend the last batch of money that we, sent you guys? Oh, yeah, that's what I think of.
Did you find your pen?
No, it's gone forever.
Search for the pen. I'll chime in on something.
It's too late.
While I don't disagree that certain schools are potentially underfunded, and that's another conversation and a rabbit hole which we can get into. I think the biggest problem in America is culture. Because if you have a teacher, a desk, and a textbook, if you're motivated, you can learn. Whether the teacher's overpaid, underpaid, motivated, not motivated, qualified, or unqualified. Because they're basically going to get some direction on what a course requirement is. They also get distributed to them certain things that kids need to know to perform on standardized tests. Otherwise, they don't get their funding. And if culturally you're told, go to school, listen to the teacher, keep your mouth closed, and learn what you can extract a hell of a lot out of an education, and you don't need somebody spoon-feeding it to you who may or may not be qualified. And I think that is absolutely demonstrated culturally in America. And I was just listening to arguments not arguments, a discourse about how Harvard has actually, and I don't know how they've done it, but what they've done is if you're Asian, it is harder to get admitted to Harvard. They're discriminated against Asians because they perform better. And I do not think, and this is not a racist comment, I do not think that Asian people in America or anywhere in the world are smarter. I think culturally they espouse education much more.
Mm-hmm.
It starts at home and it gets carried to and throughout their education, whether they're in an underfunded inner city public school system or, a private school system or a private school or academy, one off in the wealthiest of neighborhoods in any metropolitan city.
Go ahead.
Well, so I agree with you that a household that values learning and academia is more likely to produce well-educated members of society.
Well-educated is irrelevant. It's just functioning and / successful, right?
Well, I don't know about that, but I think it's difficult to legislate how people parent. So instead, we have to simply provide the best opportunities for the students the moment they walk into school. And, you said that as long as there's a teacher, a desk, and a book that someone can learn, the truth is someone can learn without the teacher or the desk. Someone can teach themselves. But the point of having school is that learning shouldn't have to be an uphill battle. The point is to provide good opportunities for people to take in the information as easily as possible. And we, having had, my personal experiences with the American education system, I don't think I think it's an uphill battle. I don't think we have schools that are structured for people to succeed.
I imagine that you and I had very similar experiences with public education. I don't know what your case is. I don't think you know what mine is, but I think we both had similar experiences. And this we're talking about right now, other than our experience with literally being in a public school, how much of it did we learn in a public school? Me, absolutely none of this came from a teacher at a school. And if it did, I quickly forgot it. The only thing that stuck around was some cool history because I had a cool teacher. And maybe some astrophysics because that stuff's also interesting, and I had a cool teacher. But other than that, none of my worldview came from a public school, and almost none of it helps me interact. The most valuable thing I got out of it was social training. That's the most valuable thing. And I don't think that is a system that we should be throwing more money at to bring it back around.
Well, Noah makes a point. It's my phone.
Oh, sounds like
It's
seals barking.
it is. That's what my ringtone is. I'm programmed
welcome,
to
man.
have to have this thing on, and I don't need to anymore, unfortunately. The sad reality, I think. So there's truth to what you say. There are good public school systems. The reality in America is, schools are funded two ways, right? There's federal money that gets thrown at asses in classes, right? Just how many butts are in seats,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's count days in inner cities where they raffle off sneakers or they have pizza day or whatever.
I had count day.
Which is sad but true.
Yeah.
But back to my point, the areas that don't have the money to fund their school systems, probably on a per capita, pupil basis, are also the areas that typically might not espouse
Those values.
and or teach those values in the home.
Yeah.
And that's, and I'll grant you that part of that is a social problem that needs addressing, and I don't think the answer is necessarily throwing money at it. But it's a vicious circle that's an impediment to certain classes and cultures in America today. But that's a very, very complicated problem.
That was remarkably diplomatic the way you stated that.
And yeah,
replied.
but throwing money at it won't solve it, because with the best teacher in the best school, if there's no culture, if somebody's not told, go there, sit down, listen to the teacher, and behave. If you're taught to not care, or you're just taught nothing, you're not going to get anything out of it, with exceptions. Would you agree?
Well, so I don't disagree.
Don't forget the mic.
I don't disagree, but I think the best that we can do is provide people with the best opportunities possible and hope that they will take those opportunities. So we can provide the best education that we can offer, and then if people latch onto that, then fantastic.
Yeah. The thing is, you cited like Scandinavian countries. So Norway, if I remember right, is roughly 5 million people. It is probably the most homogenous culture. It, I think, arguably is the most homogenous culture
North Korea.
of any westernized country.
Sorry.
Gotta let me finish.
I'm the worst.
Of any, Western country, as is Sweden, and these are cultures that go back, hundreds, if not thousands of years. I think Norway is 90% white, and 90% goes back like 4 generations or more. So you're dealing with a place that has a very consistent, predictable, and steady set of values that you can build your opportunity and have a pretty predictable outcome around. Where, the United States is 330 million people. The country's 250 years old, and you have, you have cultures and subcultures that are sometimes miles, if not blocks, apart. So it's a much, much more difficult place to potentially try to legislate an outcome that, again, I don't disagree, would be beneficial.
I reject your framing that it is an ethnic issue. I believe it is.
I didn't say it was an ethnic issue.
It's a factor.
A homogeny issue.
I didn't say it was a homogeny issue. I said that the areas that you cited are small and homogeneous and easy to manage. I didn't say that's not the problem here. Just you picked a couple of those countries are low-hanging fruit if you're going to cite them, right? We're 330 million people, right? With every kind of race, religion, creed, culture, value, everything, right? That all live. You take an area, Metro Detroit, that we're in, you don't have to go very far to have people of, different races, ethnicities, religions, socioeconomic statuses, all those kinds of things. Go to Norway, you go from one end of the country to the other, and it's the same. They even wear their clothing is hardly different.
Yeah.
So it's not the bar against which, in my opinion, to say the United States needs to look at them and take their direction, because it's not apples and oranges. It's like apples and watermelons, or maybe not even fruit.
Well, so as long as we're having conversations about real world politics and real world policy, then I think one of the most useful tools we have at our disposal is to look at cases around the world of success and failure and try to glean what kind of information from that we can. So I'm not saying that, the United States is Korea or the United States is Norway or anything, but, what I am saying is that there's valuable information in all of these locations. And if we're talking about having an honest discourse about, what works and what doesn't, then those things shouldn't be off the table simply because they're more settled into their identity as an
ethnic group.
You're missing my point. My point about Norway is a bad example because they espouse the same cultural values.
Everybody agrees. It's not, I don't have Hazm and
Right. Well, I'm
Faz-
telling you, culture, in my opinion, is the biggest problem with extracting a good education out of wherever you might go to school in America. Culture is not an issue in those countries. What can we learn from them? More than anything, we can learn that this place is way, way, way more varied in terms of values and culture.
Yeah, what was that?
Do you follow me?
I do.
What was that thing? It was Detroit. Those three moms they had the kids who, they tried to make Ebonics like a recognized language or something, and it's like because these three kids don't like. I don't want to.
That was actually national, but keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it started in Detroit. Maybe it became national, but that was like the teachers can't talk to these kids because they're speaking effectively a different language, and they're Americans. They live miles away from us or whatever. Maybe it was like Grosse Pointe or something. Where was that? It was in Michigan. It had
Locally,
to
I
be.
don't remember.
Okay, regardless. And I think that's what you mean, right? That's just like a good way to kind of characterize that point. It's like if these three kids are going to school with a bunch of kids like me and Noah who are like different clearly, it's going to cause some problems if there's one teacher and one system.
Actually, I hadn't thought about that at all.
No, I just thought that was a good way to explain it,
Um,
characterize it. No? Okay.
well,
I failed.
That-
It's typical.
no, that's another conversation that's highly specific, I think. I mean, it's not an unfair observation. I don't even know where to go with that.
The thing I'm thinking is that
I'm afraid to touch it.
I can touch it without being incendiary. The kids were doing poorly, and they weren't learning, and the moms got upset and went to school to complain, and the teacher said, I can't explain it to them in the way that I talk. Sorry. They speak differently than I do. And it's like, okay, that's one issue to tackle. And in Norway, everybody talks the same.
Well,
Whatever.
so
To wrap it up nicely.
I think I don't disagree that there is a lot of cultural difference throughout America, and those cultural differences do have an impact on the way that education is received within a community. I think the heart of those cultural differences, at least in the way that they're relevant to this conversation, is that the cultural differences that that you can point to as being related to me are those that stem from economic class. So when we look at
there comes the communist.
when we look at areas that are densely populated but highly impoverished, like areas we see around here, like Detroit, there's and they go generations back with with an impoverished population, is that you start to see a ghetto culture form, and it's that particular kind of ghetto culture that especially rejects education, right? And it's the same kind of ghetto culture that people like fantasize about and like can kind of live vicariously through rap music to feel, and it's about like I mean, I don't want to make too many broad claims about what ghetto culture is and is not, but I believe that the culture, the cultural group that is most likely to reject education is not to be blamed on anything other than the economic class that they are forced to come up in. I think people in wealthier communities tend to be, I should say families in wealthier communities tend to be more oriented towards academia. And that's leaving room for the exception of, immigrant families who come here for the American dream kind of thing. If we're talking about just native populations, it's the wealthier areas that are able to receive the education better, and it's the poorer areas that are not.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you realize this, but you just made my point.
Well, I was kind of agreeing with you, but I was in my opinion, I was pointing the finger more specifically at you know, you were correct
Here-
about an issue, but I wanted to
But
take it a step
here's
further back.
but so using your example that was, I think, fair and accurate. Take Detroit Country Day School, which is a private school here in Metro Detroit, and arguably the best, Cranbrook or Detroit Country Day.
Both extremely nice, expensive. Yeah.
Extremely nice, extremely expensive, extremely inaccessible to most. If you put one of those schools in the neighborhood you just described, the kids are still going to fail. And the common denominator in the failure is not the quality of the school or the teacher. It's that the culture doesn't espouse education.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to tackle that first.
Well, so those kinds of cultural changes have to happen gradually. You know, mostly I reject the notion of incrementalism in a lot of different areas. But in this particular field, when we're talking about, things that are ingrained over generations, those kinds of matters need to be worked out over time. So if we make the improvements now, we'll see the benefit later on. Having a better school is not going to immediately make all the kids take to education, but a few of them will, and those ones are going to grow up and be members of the community, and then they're going to have kids, and they're going to push those values on their own kids, and over time, the community becomes more accepting.
I got to disagree with that. You put a good school in the area, it won't change the home. It won't change. I mean,
How that kid feels about learning. He doesn't give a shit because no one ever taught him to. His parents or the community, including society. Something that I think is interesting. This is getting kind of dry. We got to move on.
no, you're good.
I think with these societies now coming to me, they're gonna come at me and criticize me whether or not I like it, because that's just how the world is. And I think this is not a popular opinion right now. I think that shame is good. I think that shame teaches people how to homogenize whatever. And homogenize not in a term of like race or whatever, but just like ideology, like thinking like, oh yeah, I guess I should put on deodorant today. Otherwise, people are going to say, holy crap, Charlie, you smell like shit, like you always do, or whatever, and stuff like that. It's like, that kid didn't, you don't know anything, dude. Go get some book reading or whatever, like figure it out. Like, I don't know. I think people can shame each other now much more easily, and you shouldn't look at it as a sad thing. Like, you're not getting bullied. Those people are trying to help you. And it's society's way of self-regulating. And I think we should move on from the school thing. It's getting super boring, but whatever.
I think we have kind of killed school.
Yeah. We haven't even gotten to anything. None of our ANCAP lip-sock arguments. We haven't touched anything.
We have no fireworks.
Oh God. I have some fireworks actually.
Bring them up.
I got a guy, firework guy. You know what I'm talking about. Equal opportunity. We had a huge disagreement on this, and I don't want to bring up schools but you and I talked about where the economic factor is involved. Like, I'm a man, and I don't have the opportunity as a man, not as a child, to be an effective economic factor, whatever. Do you want to kind of characterize how you explained that to me last time, or do you remember?
Make sure you're close to the mic.
Even angle, like pull it down.
Don't remember specifically that. Can you give just a little more?
Yeah, the way that it felt to me, I was arguing in favor of capitalism, and you were arguing in favor of statism, whatever. And we got to a point where you were saying, at some point, my idea won't work if there's a competing ideology, because you're going to start taking a lot of those resources, and eventually there won't be any resources left for me to do anything with, which I took as saying your idea is so good, my idea can't compete with it. So if your idea exists, capitalism, communism / statism is infeasible, not feasible.
Okay, so first of all, I am not a statist. And that is the other part of, that's the other axis of my political beliefs that I didn't really get into as much, the libertarian aspect. So if we're going to talk about socialism and, the examples we see in the real world, obviously people, bring up communism. And I have a particular interest in communism, so I often end up on the defensive side of it. But so when we look at like Soviet-style communism, that is, to me, statist socialism. But that is...
To me, statism means the existence of a state. But whatever. Is that careless? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I guess that is a way to define it.
Whatever. That's the easy... As an anarchist, that's how I would define it. The opposite of me.
Okay, well, so... I guess by that framing, I am statist. But if you're talking about the way that lefties divide themselves up, I would have to specify that I'm not statist in the way that Marxist-Leninist is.
I apologize. Yes.
But so I think what you're talking about, or what I was talking about, I guess I was talking about Trotsky. Leon Trotsky, one of his criticisms of Soviet communism I think he wrote about it in A Revolution Betrayed, which was after he was exiled from the USSR, after Stalin had pushed him out of the party, and he was just like, he might have been in Mexico at this point near the last portion of his life.
You should tell the story after this about how he got killed, but never mind.
Okay, yeah. One of his criticisms of Stalin's particular take on communism was Stalin believed that once we being the Soviets, once we achieve communism as we see fit in Russia, in the Soviet Union, then we're set, and that landmark can be checked off. But Trotsky was saying that is unsustainable, and the reason is that having an ideology that is only focused inward is not accounting for the outward pressures. So when you look at a society that is trying to embrace communism, like Venezuela, like Cuba, you'll notice it's very difficult for them to do without the U.S. hitting them with embargoes, hitting them with like backing coups, and
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I know what you're saying, but is that because they have an opposing ideology, or because they do horrible things, like produce environments wherein the citizens are subject to terrible conditions, like Venezuela, civil war, Cuba? You can't have you have to keep secret your pet pig, because if someone hears you squealing, the neighbors are going to tell on you, and this guy's got spare food. Go take his pig and whatever.
So the reason that Venezuela has is in such abject poverty is because the U.S. Made it difficult for them to be an actor on the world stage. No one can trade with Venezuela, so Venezuela has only the resources in Venezuela. And that's not an effective way to run a government, especially in a country, that size with the particular spread of resources that they have. I mean, so not being able to trade in the world is a huge dampening factor in your ability to grow as an economy and as a country.
Right, but my question remains unanswered. What happened first, human rights violations or sanctions?
Well, so, I mean...
It matters to me.
In a way, it's difficult to talk about Venezuela now because the only information that we have comes from American, or at least American allied news sources. And, it's hard to talk about our enemies objectively, right? And that's an enemy of the state.
But we're not... I can put that aside.
So my reason for bringing that up is that I don't have all the the objective facts on the timeline of when went down with Venezuela. I can't say if they were doing, things that we would say are objectionable before or after we tanked their economy. But that doesn't change the fact that we tanked their economy, and that doesn't change the fact that it is not the role of the United States to decide unilaterally what is and is not acceptable for other countries to do.
Oh, I agree with that. You don't have to convince me of that.
Right.
But I'm just saying, if they're acting in kind as a response to something that happened, like to me, the thing that kind of speaks loudly is hey, we're sending in these 3 18-wheelers full of supplies. Oh, okay, Maduro, burn it to the ground. It's like, what are you? That was Russian. I apologize. It's like, I don't get it.
Well, so it's kind of a clever ploy for publicity.
Yes, but it's not clever if you're Venezuela. It looks really bad.
No, I'm talking about on the U.S.'s part. We poop on them and we poop on them and we poop on them, and then we're like, here, don't you want our nice gifts? And they're like, we're not. The whole point is so Venezuela can look bad by rejecting it, but it's not in their best interest to take these kinds of gifts from their enemies.
Why?
Well, so first of all, I mean, if they accept that, then
What's filled with nerve gas or commandos or spy stuff? Like, I don't get like any of those. I don't understand. It's like, is it better to have my people who I pretend to be advocating for starve or starve less?
if the United States really wanted to help Venezuela, we would stop interfering with their trade. That's all it would take. And then we can say, I mean, I'm personally of the belief that we have done them so much harm that we it should be in the conversation to offer them reparations. But, obviously that's not where the the general conversation is at right now. So I think the best course of action we could have is to stop interfering with Venezuela, let them do their own thing, and, we can officially say that we are wiping our hands clean of that situation.
Educate me. Venezuela has a shitload of oil.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people who we don't get along with who need oil.
Mm-hmm.
How is it we're preventing them from selling their oil?
Don't we impose trade embargoes through the UN? Like, we're one of the loudest voices in the UN, so we have the sway to be like, this works or doesn't work, and then we have the influence to get the kinds of policies enacted that we.
If China wanted their oil, which at a price they would no doubt buy,
and they're also on the
they
Security
don't give
Council.
a fuck about the U.S. or the UN.
Yeah.
They'll buy the oil.
Why does China need Venezuela?
Was driven to insolvency by government takeover of private assets.
They would buy oil at a price. We can't stop China. Venezuela could sell their oil, independent of us or any UN embargo. They could. My point is, and I don't want to dive into that argument.
Yeah.
My point is, Venezuela's a mess. Venezuela's a mess because fundamentally their system is fucked up.
Well, so, Venezuela is a Marxist-Leninist particular strain of communism, right? So they're vanguardist. They have, they're more on the authoritarian end of the scale. So do I believe that Venezuelan communism is the ideal society? Far from it. But do I believe that they have been given a fair shake in the world scale? Not even close. I think we hinder them in every way that we can, short of direct war.
Right. My point is this. That's all fine and good. I don't disagree with you that we shouldn't have fucked with them, but I don't think that fucking with them changes the outcome that was inevitable. Like, that kind of daily operation is destined for failure and civil war. Maybe not civil war, but destined.
History has been very consistent with those outcomes.
Yes.
That's why I'm not a Marxist-Leninist, nor a Stalinist, or a Maoist, or a Trotskyist. I'm not even a communist. But I mean, I am not unwilling to criticize authoritarian governments from the libertarian point of view, so I'm with you there. But I think that's not necessarily indicative of what a libertarian socialist government would look like, because that's not what that is.
Can we jump really quick?
Sure.
I'm still having an issue. Chris would like to use the term brainwashed. As a libertarian from a young age, I was introduced to Adam Smith at the age of 11 or whatever, and Wealth of Nations the year left. Like,
No, all I said is you're very much your father's kid.
which I don't mind. I think he's a great guy.
He's not.
There's
nothing,
right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Maybe that's why we get so along, because you guys, yeah. But I have an issue with the union that is the term Libertarian Socialist. I absolutely don't understand that. Or are you talking about the social aspects or the financial aspects?
In terms of the fact that those are almost diametrically opposed
That's
words?
exactly my point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I am socially libertarian. I believe that society should be able to act in their day-to-day life as freely as is within reason.
Right, and that's not necessarily libertarian. That's just liberal, right? Progressive.
Well, no. It depends. Do you mean that people should operate in a live and let live manner? Is that basically what you're saying, to oversimplify it?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be easier to break it down issue by issue, but if
legalize drugs, legalize sex work, no identity cards. I don't know what else there is, really. Abortion, I guess.
I am pro legalization and decriminalization of drugs.
Hang on, I just, before I can get any further, I just need a yes or no. Is it basically you believe in a live and let live society?
Yeah. So once we take off of the,
I really need a yes or a no, and then we can slice it
That's
apart.
why he's got a libertarian socialist. You can't be live and let live and have socialist attached to your ideology. I apologize.
Okay. Here's the most concise answer I can give to that question.
It's not yes or no.
There are things that are non-negotiable to me, and once we take those things off of the table, once we say that the non-negotiable things are for the government to pay attention to, everything else then
you got to have the courage to say no.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's manipulative.
Well, I don't necessarily.
You got to pick one, or I can't move on.
Well,
at a high level, do you believe it? Does that mean because libertarian basically means live and let live?
I believe,
and then you can slice and dice it
a little bit.
Further.
Of it, yeah.
I believe in our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Is that a close enough answer?
No.
Not even close, right. I don't see, the libertarian to me means I don't give a shit what you do as long as you don't fuck with me.
Mm-hmm. And that's live and let live.
Okay,
people,
well, so then, yeah, if that's the definition, then yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. All right.
Easy enough. Okay, please continue.
So there's some libertarian mixed in there.
That's very much libertarian. If that's what you think about how we should interact with each other, it pretty much follows non-aggression principle, which is my philosophy. Now, how does your socialist?
I got to point out one thing. Both of you espouse change with force.
I don't apply.
Just so you both.
Wait.
know
How do
that.
I espouse change with force?
You're an anarchist, man.
I don't think that we should force people to become anarchists. I just believe in it.
Agreed. I mean, but for my thing.
Yeah, see, Chris is like.
I gotta bite my lip here. And
You're such a romantic with this
let this
anarchy,
play.
which I have admitted to. So yes, it is a romantic thing.
Let me make an example with communism, because it's something that I've been studying a lot recently, and like the different strains of communism. So before, after Marx, of course, but before there was a Bolshevik revolution, before Lenin was around, there was De Leon.
Anastasia.
I forget his first name, something De Leon, and he was an American socialist, and he was an American communist, and he led a movement which ultimately, didn't hit the critical point of penetration, but it was a rising movement for the time that he was active in it, and he was a communist, but he was not by any stretch like a violent revolutionary. And his, he said that the best way to achieve his goals was through legal elections and being an active member in the political discourse and unionization and trying to raise awareness and peaceful protests. And nowhere did he talk about violence. So that may be one of the tactics that is more familiar to us, because that's one of the ones that, tends to make more ripples, but that's not inherent to it. And then like you get into Rosa Luxemburg, who had her own strain of communism. She was active in Germany at the same time that Lenin and Trotsky and I guess also Stalin were active in Russia. And she, even though she was, a strong admirer of Lenin, she was critical of him in his strict adherence to violent revolution. And she said that that is not the only tool that should be in the tool belt. And then she also criticized De Leon for being a little too soft. She was like, there's a time and a place for this tactic and for that tactic, and they're both just tools in the tool belt. But so my point is that, just because I may have ideas that are revolutionary doesn't mean that I think the only approach is through violence.
I appreciate all that. Violence is bad. We can agree. But I think we started with, what is this Frankenstein union of the term libertarian socialism? I'm still missing that.
Okay, so I'll break it down into issues. There are the things that I think are off the table for, things that I think ought to be guarantees, right? I think we ought to be able to live without fear of going into medical debt. We ought to be able to live without fear of dying of a curable disease or a treatable disease. So things like that those to me aren't negotiable. And those kinds of things need to be provided for us. But beyond that, when we talk about, social liberties that like legalizing drugs, I'm for that. Legalizing sex work, that's fine. Because those things are...
But we can argue about them. They're not off the table.
Totally.
Off the table in terms of I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just trying to get
off the table.
Understand where you're coming from.
In terms that it's not to me an issue that should be a concern of the governments. So
no, but I mean, you said the two healthcare issues; those are off the table. We don't. Those should be considered almost rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you're saying this. Yeah, it's like
and then the other ones. These are my beliefs, but they're open for debate.
So, I guess the way I was framing it wasn't totally clear, but there are the things that I think, so in a way you could frame, socialized medicine as freedom, right? Because
no, not in any way.
Well, hang on. No, I think you misunderstood what I was trying to clarify. It's just.
You're just saying...
You opened it with, there's two kind of non-starters. And those are, nobody's going to die of a curable disease and nobody's going to go into unrecoverable medical debt.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went on. So my inference was that
is your biggest issue.
The first two are non-starters. And then here's my personal beliefs. But so are we now in the land where you're talking about, these are my beliefs and... they are negotiable, or
he was just making a categorization,
I'm just trying to
distinction between your views,
like who you are and what you think.
Let me start over.
Precisely.
There are the things that I think are responsibilities of the government, and there's everything else. The things that are responsibilities of the government ought to be handled by the government, and everything else that that doesn't directly need to be overseen in a collectively agreed upon way, doesn't need to be part of the responsibility of the government. So I think we should have access to a certain amount of things, and I think so this is I mean, I guess this is I'm having a kind of a difficult time here trying to frame it.
What you said already was medical debt, whatever, health, which I think is fallacious. You can't guarantee health. And then you said sex work, drugs, and something else. And Chris was just trying to say, are those things all in the same category of godliness to you, or are they, you can argue some of them? You're open to change with some of those.
Okay, I believe that as an overall guiding force, secondary to my guiding force of socialism, that as many things that can be free without causing problems ought to be free. So
Okay.
I believe that it shouldn't be up to the market to decide who can and cannot get what treatment. I think those things ought to be freedoms allotted to everyone. So in a way, the libertarian socialist perspective is where those two kinds of where they overlap is, I believe people have the freedom to have access to the best life that they can have. And,
Which is very non-controversial. I think it's almost apolitical of a statement. But
well, so then then we can take it into the issues. But that's if I'm going down to the absolute root of it, how can I synthesize those two things? I believe people ought to have freedoms, personal freedoms, and I think those freedoms ought to include some of the things that are provided that can be provided through socialism.
okay, I get that. I just think the socialist side of you is using libertarianism as a tool to justify your socialism in a society. Like, if we're libertarian, then it's cool with everybody. We don't have to argue about it because everyone is cool with it because no one hurts each other. But it's like, to some libertarians, that taking the money out of their paycheck every 2 weeks to get the money to pay for the healthcare for other people is harm. So you can't have the two.
Well, so that's where I would disagree.
Right. You disagree, but those guys don't.
Well, so I mean, when we talk about libertarianism is just it's one side of the spectrum that is independent of the left-right spectrum. So, there are libertarians.
It's like a rhombus.
There are libertarians that lean right, which I think is the more prevalent kind of libertarian that you're going to come across here in America. But there are also people who lean left and are libertarian. And I think it might be
The Starbucks coffee guy, Matt Schultz, right? Jeff Bezos. Those are two left-leaning guys. And then I think of like Ross Perot. That's like a right-leaning. And then Ron Paul.
Jeff Bezos, I would not say is left-leaning. Not even close.
I absolutely disagree. That's okay.
Okay, but
Wait, he's Amazon libertarian, yeah.
So I think the libertarian that portion of the name, I guess, might be a little bit more misleading than I anticipated, and maybe I'll try to reflect on that and try to find a more accurate term. But it's as far as I can tell in my research, that's the best way to describe the kind of where I am in the political axis, as being like I'm not an anarcho-communist, but like I'm kind of a couple steps away from that in either section or in either direction towards the middle. So like without being a communist, I'm a socialist. Without being an anarchist, I guess that makes me more libertarian. But I mean libertarian.
So you're as much of a moderate as Chris is.
No,
you guys are both cowards. I didn't know this.
I'm libertarian in the sense that I'm not authoritarian.
Okay, that's fair. That's more of a philosophical form of libertarianism.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I mean.
Rather than a political sense, which I was going to ask to start, but I didn't. Okay, that sums it up. That's fair. I don't have any qualms with that. I still think it's confusing, but I don't know that you don't have the right to call yourself that. So no beef for me.
Well, so what do you think about that then? In my definition, that libertarian as opposed to authoritarian.
I'm still struggling with what you're socialist about other than medicine.
Okay, well, so I what issues do you want to talk about?
I don't know where you stand. I still can't get there.
To me, it's how he thinks society should be, how we should interact with each other. That's what's socialist about him. The egalitarianism as opposed to hierarchical.
Because you're saying everybody should
Be the same.
have the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. I mean, that's like
That's what I said. It's apolitical.
the first sentence of fill in the blank for libertarianism or capitalism. Right, so I don't know what we might agree or not agree on.
I think we agree on don't hurt people, right? Which is nice.
Yeah.
I just think we disagree on what the definition of harm is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which to me is almost evil, but I won't say evil because I think you're a nice person.
So I think people ought to have a right to food in their bellies, for example. And I think that we are at a point
To what extent? I'm on a
to the extent that they are full.
To what
Okay,
extent of
see-
procuring the food?
We
Well,
do in America. There is not the only people who don't have food are people who are mentally ill and consequently homeless.
That's
There
not
is
necessarily
a
true.
huge, the highest correlation of obesity is with people who live in poverty, and that's a fact in America.
With obesity?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a malnutrition. right?
Nobody's going hungry in America who wants food. Nobody.
So that's a health problem. That you're illustrating an issue, which is that
You're not you might be malnourished, but that's a choice.
Right.
But you're not undernourished if you're clinically obese.
And upon to the extent that I requested, you said that there's food in their belly, so we're within our rights to request.
Right. If you choose to drink Mountain Dew over eating vegetables, I don't feel sorry for you.
well, so part of that is an availability problem. You know, you can find information about all these places across the country. They call them like food deserts, where it's like the closest place where you can buy groceries, like within a 50-mile radius, is like a shitty convenience store.
Detroit City. That's one of them. All the grocery stores left because people were stealing, and they said, we're not doing this anymore. Fuck you guys.
Right.
And you know what they did? They started doing the city garden things, which is, I think that's great.
Well, so
Chris is something on his mind. Please mention it. Looks like you're a little annoyed with that.
I'm annoyed with both of you.
That's okay.
So
That's what we're here for.
So urban farming does not produce enough food to offer sustainable nourishment to
Supplemental nourishment, though, right?
maybe
But I think that's what it was intended for.
this much a maybe. But yeah, you're right. So what's within walking distance for people who can't afford a car? A convenience store. There are still better choices to be made. You can buy ramen noodles. You can buy pasta. You can buy things that are far better than chips and pop.
Peanut butter and jelly.
Peanut butter and jelly.
It's a price. There's almost doesn't cost anything. It's like 23 cents a sandwich. Yeah.
Well,
It's great.
so part of it is the availability, and then part of it is, I think, also tied with education, because people who are less informed are gonna have less adequate information on nutrition, and that's why we have all these these awareness programs every however many years they make a new one. Like there was the food pyramid, then it was My Plate, and the whole point of that is to
My plate. Right.
to get people to know like what you should put in your body. But the fact of the matter is, people don't always know that, and
They don't give a shit. That's what I think it is. I don't give a shit. I know what the thing is. I did all right in my nutrition course. I don't fucking care. Like, whatever. And that's what it comes down to me. Because the information is
But hang
not
on.
out of my reach.
All right. So let him finish.
Sorry. I should
'Cause I'm
stop
still-
interrupting you.
Still trying to understand his position.
Well, so part of it is about the education, part of it is about availability, and I don't know if I had a third thing. I kind of lost my train of thought.
See what you did. See what we were supposed to have learned from the
You
first
need a
6
button
episodes.
to cut my mic so you can just be like. I am sorry. I'm all excited.
Well, so
This is a good episode, guys. I'm having fun.
I am too. But so beyond the question of
I got to interrupt you. You got to remember that you know this guy way better than our audience and I know him.
We don't even know each other that well, I would say.
Yeah, but you've argued with him before.
Sure. Okay.
And I haven't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll let you.
And
Yeah,
now he's all
okay.
flustered on the food thing.
Well, so beyond just the question of are people getting food? I think it should be a freedom that that there's just food. I don't think you should have to spend your own money on food. And, so here we get into one of my bigger issues is that, like, 4 out of 5 Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, right? People they don't have the economic, social mobility that they ought to be able to have in a functioning capitalist society, right?
Are you aware that in that 4 out of 5 people, it's irrespective of income, and that is inclusive of people who are 1%ers? Did you know that? You did know that?
4 out of 5 Americans, yeah.
Yeah. So people who make 200, 300, 400 grand a year live paycheck to paycheck. So the common denominator is people make shitty choices at all stations in life.
Well, so, all right. So then
Did you also know that like FICO scores are completely irrespective of income?
Well, I don't know what a FICO score is, so we can.
Credit score.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so
My point is, people are idiots with regard to, and even diet, money, health,
Instant gratification. To me, that's what it comes down
Yeah.
to with all those things.
regardless of income.
Yeah.
Just as an FYI.
Yeah.
okay. Well,
Sorry to interrupt.
side note, those are all things that I think are being inadequately taught in school. And I'm not just talking about like in poor schools, but like in the schools I went to, they didn't teach you about like, what'd you say, FICO score?
Yeah.
Yeah. That should be, we should be learning about, how to function in the world that we have to live in, including money management and nutrition and health. That should be stuff that we're learning like from kids onward.
I think we should, but it's no excuse to blame somebody else for me not knowing that shit.
No, not blaming someone else, blaming the system that failed to teach you.
I'm sorry. That's it's an entity. It's a group of.
I got to disagree with
Oh.
that because I was a financial idiot until I was 30. Every dollar I made, and I was doing very well for a young man, slipped through my fingers until I was like, I started reading, just in the newspaper and, before Yahoo Finance existed, like, holy shit, I'm 30 years old and I haven't saved a dime.
In pursuit of what? I'm just curious. Just like stuff, fun.
Yeah, going skiing, having a cool car, going to the bar.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't tell you how many thousands of dollars must have slipped between my fingers going to the bar 2 nights a week every
Just
night.
waste. It's unbelievable. I sat down with my buddy and calculated it. I can't remember, but just 2 nights a week, 50 weeks a year it's an insane thousands of dollars.
Well, right.
Yeah.
And these are the things they don't teach you in school. These are, no one I never took a class on how to save money. And if those are lessons that we are taught and internalize at a younger age, then you wouldn't have to, wind up being 30 years old and realize you haven't saved any money.
I don't know that I'd say that. I would say that you just might be better at it. And because that's why I'm saying it's no excuse that someone else didn't teach it to you, and you might say the system isn't someone else, quote unquote. But to me, that's what it is. It's just a different entity. It's a group of people, and I can't blame them for my shortcomings, and I think it's a cop out if you do that too.
Okay, so you want to talk about equal opportunity? We all ought to have the opportunity for financial success, and by not teaching the way to achieve that in school, not making it blatant, absolutely explicit. These are the things that you should do, and these are the things that you should not do if you want to succeed in the kind of economy that we have created as a country. If we're not being adequately taught those things, then we're not being given equal opportunity to have those kinds of successes.
So I'm going to help your argument and hurt your argument here. So with regard to the nuts and bolts of that statement, I agree with you. Now I forget how it's going to help you and hurt you. But
Look at him. He's giving the.
I'll take it.
yeah. Oh, so yeah, as far as opportunity to a class that might teach you how to be financially responsible, for someone like me who grew up with opportunity, yeah, whatever, it comes out in the wash, and I was free to be an idiot, right? You take somebody who grows up on the poorest block in the poorest city, to a single mom who's addicted to whatever. So the shitty school system that you complained about, that kid's doomed. That kid has no opportunity.
Unless
I know where I was going. So a lot of it comes back to, this is where it's going to hurt you, comes back to culture and cultural values, and where certain segments are just culturally failing. So
I'm actually glad you brought it back to the culture, because I had another point I wanted to make about that. And so to tie it back to the food issue, there are grocery stores now coming back to Detroit. My mom lives in Detroit, so I spend part of my week over there every week, and they have built like Whole Foods. They've built like nice groceries, and the fact of the matter is that people are shopping there, and people who have access to these better ingredients and better foods are taking advantage of that now. So, to say that people are only going to make bad choices with their nutrition in these kinds of areas, like, and I may be overgeneralizing your point just a little bit, but like,
you're actually you're not hijacking, you're
bolstering.
No,
Oh.
you're taking a huge left turn with it, but keep going.
Well, so people who previously didn't have access to like high quality food and organic food are now embracing it and taking advantage of that now that they have access to it. So I think that's an example of how the poor ghetto culture is being penetrated.
You said that, not me. Just to be clear,
I refuse to believe that that's where the Whole Foods is. It's not in the poor ghetto culture's block or whatever. There's people. The place that I work is a high-end pizzeria. It's great, extremely, and I would say ridiculously expensive. People that live in Detroit come there, and it's not close. They eat there. Those are the people that are going to that Whole Foods. It's not the people who forced out all the other grocery stores and need urban farming to survive.
Well, so it's obviously like Detroit doesn't employ too much mixed land use. So obviously there's like the commercial region, and then there's like the neighborhoods and the suburban portion. But I disagree in so the point is like it is in Detroit where these people can access it, and it is my observation as someone who's gone to these places that you get a wide variety of people of all different kinds of Detroit folk that turn up.
Okay, if you're claiming it as an observation, then I won't say that you're lying. But to me, it's kind of hard to believe that they're the same groups of people that are buying at shopping at Whole Foods and the people that caused all the grocery stores to leave.
I guess I'm not sure what your point is. It sounds like it's in response to my comment that the highest correlation between obesity is among people who are living in poverty. But you're helping my argument by saying that there's a higher availability of quality food now.
Well, that's an example of the situation improving. You know, there's when people, it's an example of people who previously didn't have access to quality food, and now that they have it, they are accepting it as opposed to rejecting it. And I was kind of tying it back to the argument that about
Food availability.
well, sure, but beyond that, the way that a class may reject progress, I think that is an example of to the contrary, if that makes sense.
I think we're closing our argument. We're not even really agreeing to disagree. We don't disagree that much.
I think, and that's why I liked arguing with him all those months ago, is because we actually agree kind of fundamentally, but I would say that you might be misled on some of the solutions.
Well, that's where maybe reasonable discourse doesn't have the fireworks you might always want, particularly in a...
Yeah. And I tried to get unreasonable. I tried, but it's hard. I'm like trying to, whatever.
No, but what's going on right here is where maybe we're not as amusing as we thought we might have been, but...
No, it's just turned into an intellectual conversation as opposed to an entertaining conversation.
And a reasonable conversation where you listen to people and you actually say, well, wait, I might concede on something here.
I've been biting my tongue.
Or learn something.
Yeah. Well, what did we talk about then? We had an awesome discussion. What did we talk about? We talked about
Venezuela.
No. The minutia in the difference between the implications of capitalism on people who don't have grandfathered opportunity. Remember that? No.
So do you want a submitted argument?
It's my opinion that you can. I can't. We can't. I have no idea how to bring it back up. Well, how about this? Let's talk about a current event. What about this Iran thing going on? Have you seen it in the news since I just brought it up to you last week?
And the tankers?
Yeah.
They blew holes in tankers.
Yeah. Well, your boy Bernie, I was proud of him for the first time in a while because he was on an interview.
In a while.
Yeah.
Not ever?
Sorry, I meant to say ever. I like that what he said for the first time ever. I told you that I kind of liked his message, which is like anti-establishment. I just think that socialism is evil. Yeah.
Well, I think Bernie's terribly
Confused.
No, I don't think he's confused. I think he's crystal clear. I just think he's ignorant.
I was just making fun of his age.
That having been said,
yeah.
Where am I? He's at least the real deal.
Yeah.
As much as I completely disagree with almost everything that comes out of his mouth, he's one of the few guys in Washington who does what he says and says what he does.
Including being opposed to war, which is what I liked. He had this interview, and like historically speaking, news outlets are 100% in favor of initiating conflicts, going into conflicts, war. It's like good for money, always. And this, reporter is talking out of she's flapping her gums about, Iran's doing this and they're being really aggressive, and shouldn't we be, we should be doing Trump is saying this, but whatever. she was more or less saying Iran's being very aggressive, even though we don't know that they did it. And Bernie goes, whoa, hold on. Don't be saying stuff like they're being aggressive. What are we going to do about it when we don't even know if they're being aggressive? He's like, I don't believe that this is going on. We need an objective discussion.
Well, also beyond that, I mean,
Investigation, excuse me.
I think anything that they may be doing right now is in response to the increased hostility that we've shown towards them. I think we can see a clear trend that like it's happening again. We're ramping up for another invasion, another regime change war, another oil cash grab, and it's
That's obviously how it's being painted in the news, and that's how they want us to think about it. I am kind of being conspiratorial in my efforts to.
I agree. I was going to say I'm getting comfortable enough with you to say I think you're fantasizing.
Me?
No.
Oh.
I think Noah is.
Oh. That's how they want us to look at it, right? Oh my God! There's the fleet, and
here's America doing it again. Oh boy, we got something to get pissed about.
Fuck yeah! Yeah, right. And then that's whatever. My dad was running it by me. He's just like, that has economic implications that can raise the economy for Trump. And what happens when there's an election and there's a war going on? That guy gets reelected. So
right.
Whatever. I'm just saying there's a lot of interesting things going on, and Bernie was pointing out lies from the White House.
Yeah. So we ramp up our rhetoric and we start making, hostile statements towards Iran, and then Iran, does whatever kind of action they can in response, as being a little shithole country.
Shitholes.
And then we're like, oh my God, look how bad Iran is acting. Shouldn't we go over there and spank them? It's like, well, they wouldn't be increasing their hostility towards us if we weren't doing it first.
Now, Chris pointed something out to me last week that I was unable to advocate for, but I was accepting of, which was have the fleet or have an aircraft carrier sit off Syria? Yeah.
Yeah.
Go to Syria and shoot down these fucking planes or whatever missiles that are dropping chemical bombs on citizens.
Yeah, that was when I was talking about Obama in Syria.
No, but I'm just saying this is the isolation. It's a conversation that is related to isolationism and interventionism, or being an interventionalist. That's a word that I don't know.
Interventionist? I think that's a word.
Do you agree that what he's saying, which is they're only fucking with us because we're fucking with them, which is a very Rand Paul thing?
Could be. We can't know.
Right.
There's a hole in two tankers.
Especially not a week after it happened.
Am I remembering?
Yeah, a hole in one of them. One of them caught on fire. A hole in the second one. That one didn't catch on fire or sink. And the captain even thinks that Iran didn't do this. Well,
and on a 1 to 10, the degree to which this is a huge international deal to me is like a 2.
Right. That's what I think. Which to me smells of
well, do you remember
some kind of a puppeteer?
Do you remember in our second or third podcast that I was complaining about the news, and I said what people tune into if there's fire, right? When shit blows up and catches on fire, people tune in. So you show a picture of a tanker with a hole in it with,
on fire,
black on fire where there was smoke, and people are going to tune in. I think this is as much something for the press to feed on, unfortunately, because, plane crash, if you have
Notre
footage.
Dame.
Yeah.
That was a
huge So this has nothing to do with why the three of us got together, but here's something that really bugs me. So about 120 people die in car crashes every day. Every day.
Wow.
In America.
Obviously.
Every day.
Nowhere else matters.
So two things. Because it happens every day, it's not going to be news every day. And because you don't get footage of fiery crashes.
Because it never happens.
Well, you just never catch it, right? Because it happens in random places. You just never get it on the news.
Okay.
And it's to me, it's tragic because, one, it totally trivializes that 120
Super sad thing.
arguably good people die every freaking day. If there's a plane crash and one person dies, it is national headlines, right? I mentioned, when Harrison Ford crashed his plane on I think it was on a golf course.
Yeah, it was upside. He broke
and
his
nobody
arm.
got hurt.
Yeah.
It was front page. Plane crash, right?
With a picture of the plane on the front, yeah, upside down in a bunker or whatever, right?
So, tanker gets bombed, fire, flames, explosions. Iran, tune in into 6, right?
Whoa.
So that's to me 75% of what's going on.
And I like that.
Just the news business.
And I like that because it plays on something. The same professor that taught me the skepticism thing, not taught me that, but was the first teacher that I'd ever heard espouse that. He was also the first teacher I'd ever heard say, people are rubes. And that is very much an example of how people are rubes. Fire, whoa! It's like,
Yeah.
does it matter? Like, who gives a shit? Do you have an opinion, Noah?
I think you bring up an interesting point because, you're correct that, news media doesn't really, calling it news media is...
Corporate media.
Yeah, it's kind of a misnomer because it's not about, what is the objective truth that people need to know about. It is what is the story that we can profit off of, and that involves having a political narrative kind of in the background more often than not, and
or whatever it is.
Just as long as it's
I'm
the
going to
thing
help
of the
you
time.
here.
Yeah.
I'm going to get you there quicker. They're television shows.
well, so here's the real issue that is true, and but they also are intrinsically tied with the military-industrial complex. So, the media plays a role in preparing the general populace for swallowing the pill that is, well, we're invading someone. And, and in return, they get ratings because, like you said, where there's fire and explosions, there's people tune in. So when we get war, people get fascinated and people, people watch news. So it's the news is profiting when we go to war, and in return the military industrial complex gets all the praise from the news organizations.
Which is what I
generally agree with you, but I don't agree that it's conspiratorial. I think it's just totally coincidental.
It is, but I still... That's what I meant when I brought it up. It's just like they're not looking out for you, and I was proud that Bernie wasn't just for...
Yeah, look into it, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. I do not think that there's a connection
No,
politically between, the news and a war machine.
Right.
I just think that people tune in to fire and death and explosions, and I mean, what produces more of that than war?
And as a business, you have to capitalize on that.
I mean, think of the biggest war and the most dramatic war is World War II. People still watch documentaries, buy books, are completely fascinated by the war and Hitler.
How many Hitler documentaries are there? Infinite.
Never ending.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to go home and watch one tonight. I've never once watched one.
Really?
Never once. I just don't really think he's that interesting. People are like, whoa. And I think that's fucked up.
So, well...
Who, the painter?
That was in jest, people.
If you're American, it's also a very romantic war because we came in and we saved the day, and we,
the
for the most part, did.
Or was that World War One?
I think that's World War One. But
yeah.
But again, just I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just
that's ridiculous.
what people like.
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound conspiratorial, but I can provide evidence that there is a connection. And it's, I don't have the article right in front of me. I would have to dig it up and then,
I'll take you at your word.
So I remember reading about how the guy in charge of MSNBC, and it's not just MSNBC, but this is one that's like, they've been caught red-handed, directly takes orders from party leaders in the Democrats, and in particular the DNC folks, and it came out that they are literally the mouthpiece of the Democratic Party. So the connections are more than just coincidental. There's interests at play here, and people who are wanting or willing to capitalize on those interests.
But I think it's more that than conspiracy.
No. I agree completely with what you just said, but not with respect to war.
Oh.
Not war in particular. I thought you were singling that out.
War is one of the few issues that Democrats and Republicans both agree on. That's the thing that they're both for, and because it makes money. So any organization,
it makes people have faith in government.
I was going to say it legitimizes government,
Yeah.
national government.
Yes.
Well, I mean, so I think when we talk about the military-industrial complex, we should refer back to FDR's.
That's when World War I really kicked it off. But yeah, we like cashed in on that shit.
Yeah, and he was warning us about it all the way back then, and so
Finish your thought.
to think that
Finish your thought on FDR because I want to hear it. You were educating me.
He gave a speech about the military-industrial complex. It was like his farewell address, and he talked about, basically he just used it as a platform to be like, this is an issue that hasn't really that we're not seeing the effects of too much yet, but if we leave it unchecked, it'll grow out of control. And I think he was A, correct, and B, there's not a B there, but B, I think the fact that the military-industrial complex is so, has been allowed to exist for as long as it has unchecked, then to think that it has breached into the news outlets is not that far of a stretch. Again, because we can see the clear ties between the parties that perpetuate war and the mouthpieces that they
But I don't think,
use.
my point is, I think Chris is also making the point, I don't think there even needs to be the political connection to incentivize news providers to be like pro-war. It's like the business itself makes them like that. They don't need politics to make them pro-war.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the real issue there is that news is a business. That's another thing that I think has been
Which
poisoned
is the
by
main
capitalism.
Oh, exactly. The news is not news. It's showbiz.
Right.
It's television shows.
And it's only poisoned, by the way, if that's doctrine to you. You don't have to believe everything they say. You can just consume it.
And this may precede you guys, and maybe you're aware of this, and maybe not. But CNN originally, when cable became a 24-hour proposition, CNN reported in Iran, and they gave around the clock, and they were a lot more than like BBC is now, where they're just more kind of dry reporting. This is the news, and we're actually a news agency, and got huge credibility and put themselves into business between the way they covered Iran and the fact that they were on 24/7. And now they've just become another showbiz, unfortunate, cable network program.
Was that CNN? There's footage, you can YouTube it. I think it's CNN, where it's like they set up a fake, like a prop scene of like, we're seeing ballistic missiles landing and whatever. They're like, was that CNN?
I think I remember. I think so.
And if you watch it nowadays, just like in comparison to like even this camera, it's hilarious how they like that could even work on people. It's like they have paper trees. It looks like like my Catholic school set up for a Christmas play.
Well, I mean, another example is you can find footage of Anderson Cooper, and he's reporting on flooding. There was like a hurricane or some weather event. He was like, look how bad everything is flooded. And you see him, he's reporting, and he's in the water up to his knees. Or like
somebody
thighs.
walks by, right?
Yeah. And he was just crouching in the water.
No.
No.
Yeah.
Even better is the one where the girl's in a canoe, and then somebody walks by. And
You know what else was really sad was the whole Brian Williams thing, where he was in a helicopter that it got him kicked off of being the NBC nightly news anchor.
Was that when he said he was like under fire or something?
Yeah. And the sad thing is there were like 3 or 4 helicopters, and the helicopter behind him or in front of him was actually under fire. And all he had to do was, he said, the helicopter behind me was under fucking fire. And I'm like, we're next. I was totally frightened for my life. The story could have been just as dramatic and just as good had he told the truth in the right way. It's really sad.
That's actually a fair point. It's not, you're not, because if you lie, that makes you a coward. But if you're telling the truth, you're not a coward. It's like, that's a fairly justifiable fear.
Yeah, but for him, it was, you know, he was,
Right,
you know,
in the
they're
helicopter, yeah.
they keep trying to make the new.
But Hillary had the same kind of BS story.
Who's the
right?
guy? Not Mike Wallace. Who's before Mike Wallace? The guy that
William
everybody
Wallace.
trusted. No, you know, and that's the way it is. Oh my God.
Walter Cronkite.
Yeah.
And
You know,
that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. No, and nobody trusts anybody anymore. I do want to say one quick thing. We're closing in on 2 hours, so it's probably a good time to wrap up.
This is fun though.
Well,
I don't know if it's good, but it's
went by,
fun.
It went by really quickly.
Yeah.
Really quickly.
Yeah. No, sorry if we shit on you too much. I enjoy you as a person and think you provide something of value intellectually. So I think that was necessary for us to say.
No, it was good. This was again as I said in the beginning, good conversation, civil discourse. That's how problems get solved. Maybe it's not always the sexiest thing.
Not when it's us three talking about it.
Flames, fire, fireworks, right?
Yeah.
Anything you want to say before we wrap
Got any
up?
plugs, dude? You got any plugs?
I don't think I have anything to plug.
What's your Twitter handle?
I don't think I have a Twitter.
Good for you.
I make music, but I don't have anything out yet, so there's nothing to plug there.
Oh, we
Oh,
are
wait.
looking for a music source.
Oh, really?
That would be
Get
awesome.
us some original stuff that you license us to use.
We could open
For-
and close a show with it.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, so yeah,
Oh.
we can have that conversation. It sounds interesting.
We won't pay you. No, I'm just kidding. We can have that
We'll
discussion.
plug
too.
you. Get a YouTube channel.
I was even being sarcastic, but we don't have to talk business on the show.
Well, cool. So beyond my short list of plugs, thanks for having me on, guys. I had a good time.
Thanks for coming on and being our first guest.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an
Technically,
honor.
right? Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching. Over and out.